Gather round, my friends, and let's take a trip into the dream world as the day draws to a close and the outside world becomes silent. You can rely on me to lead you into a magical and fascinating world where stories come to life and the commonplace is transformed into the exceptional. We're going to go on an excursion tonight that will take you to a pleasant sleep with its lullabies, whispers, and stories. Let your bed's warmth serve as your comfortable haven, and let your screen's soothing glow serve as your campfire. Now, grab a pillow and let's go into the enchanted realm of bedtime story, the Golden Bird. There was once a king who had a beautiful garden with a tree that bore golden apples. The apples were always counted, and it was discovered that every night one of them was missing. The king became very angry and ordered the gardener to keep watch under the tree at night. The gardener's eldest son was put in charge of watching, but he fell asleep around midnight, and another apple was missing in the morning. The king then ordered the second son to watch, but he too fell asleep, and another apple was gone in the morning. Finally, the third son offered to keep watch, and even though the gardener was initially reluctant, he eventually agreed. The young man lay under the tree to watch, and at midnight he heard a rustling noise and saw a bird of pure gold flying around. The bird was snapping at one of the apples with its beak when the gardener's son shot an arrow at it. However, the arrow did not harm the bird, but it dropped a golden feather from its tail and flew away. The next day, the golden feather was presented to the king, and the council agreed that it was worth more than all the wealth in the kingdom. However, the king insisted that he must have the whole bird, as one feather was of no use to him. The eldest son of the gardener set out to find the golden bird. As he walked, he came across a fox in a wood. The son aimed his bow at the fox, but the fox spoke to him and asked him not to shoot. The fox then offered to help the son by giving him some advice on how to find the golden bird. The fox told him that when he reached the village in the evening, he would find two inns opposite to each other. One of them would be very pleasant and beautiful, while the other would look poor and mean. The fox advised him to rest in the latter, even though it would appear uninviting. The son thought that the fox could not possibly know anything about the matter and decided to ignore the advice. He shot an arrow at the fox, but missed it, and the fox ran away. Later, the son arrived at the village and saw the two inns. One of them was full of people singing, dancing, and feasting, while the other looked dirty and poor. Despite the fox's advice, he chose to stay in the pleasant and beautiful inn and forgot about the golden bird and his mission. As time passed, the eldest son, who had set out to find the golden bird, did not return, and no news of him was heard. The second son then decided to set out on the same quest, and he too met the fox who gave him good advice. However, when he reached the two inns, he saw his elder brother at the window of one of the inns where there was merrymaking, and he couldn't resist the temptation to join in. He forgot all about the golden bird and his own country in the same way that his brother had. Time passed again, and the youngest son also wanted to venture out into the world to look for the golden bird. However, his father was hesitant to let him go, as he loved him dearly and feared that he might not return. Eventually, the father allowed him to go. As he entered the woods, he met the fox, who gave him the same advice. Unlike his brothers, he was grateful to the fox and did not try to harm him. The fox then told him to sit on his tail so that they could travel faster, ran so quickly that their hair whistled in the wind as they went over stock and stone. When they arrived at the village, the son followed the advice of the fox without looking around and spent the night at a shabby inn. The next morning, the fox met him again and instructed him to go straight ahead until he reached a castle. Outside the castle, he would find a group of soldiers asleep. He should not be bothered by them, but instead go inside the castle and pass through several rooms until he finds a chamber where a golden bird sits inside a wooden cage. Next to it stands a beautiful golden cage, but he must not try to transfer the bird from the shabby cage to the beautiful one. If he did so, he would regret it. Then the fox stretched out its tail, and the young man sat down. They rode over bumps and stones, and the wind whistled through their hair. As the fox had said, the entrance to the castle was guarded by soldiers, all asleep and snoring. The son found the room with the wooden cage holding the golden bird, and beside it was the golden cage. The 3 golden apples that he had lost also lay nearby. The son thought it would be funny to take the beautiful bird out of the shabby cage and put it into the golden cage. However, the bird let out such a loud scream that it woke up all the soldiers, who then arrested him and took him to the king. The next day, the court found him guilty and sentenced him to death, unless he brought the king the golden horse that could run as fast as the wind. If he succeeded, the king would give him the golden bird as a reward. He set out on his journey once more, feeling sad and in despair. Suddenly, his friend the fox appeared and said, "You see what has happened because you didn't listen to my advice. However, I can still help you find the golden horse if you follow my instructions. Continue straight until you reach the castle where the horse is kept. The groom will be asleep beside him. Quietly take the horse, but be sure to put on the old leather saddle, not the golden one nearby." The son sat on the fox's tail, and they went over rocks and stones until they reached the castle. The groom was snoring, and the golden saddle was beside him. The son felt bad putting the leather saddle on the beautiful horse, so he put on the golden one. The groom woke up and shouted, and the guards took the son prisoner. The next day, he was brought before the court and sentenced to death. However, if he could bring the princess to the court, he would be pardoned and given the horse and bird. The son left the castle, feeling sad. The old fox appeared again, saying, "Why didn't you listen to me? If you had, you could have taken the bird and the horse. However, I'll give you another chance. Keep going until you reach a castle. At midnight, the princess goes to the bathing house. Give her a kiss, and she'll let you take her away. But don't let her say goodbye to her parents." The son sat on the fox's tail again, and they went over rocks and stones until they reached the castle. As they arrived at the castle, everything was exactly as the fox had predicted. At 12 o'clock, the young man met the princess on her way to the bath and kissed her. She agreed to run away with him, but begged him to let her say goodbye to her father first. He initially refused, but her tears and pleas eventually convinced him. However, as soon as she arrived at her father's house, the guards woke up and arrested him again. He was brought before the king, who said that he could only have his daughter if he managed to remove a hill that blocked the view from his window within 8 days. The hill was so large that it seemed impossible to remove. After working for 7 days and making little progress, the fox appeared and told him to go to sleep. The next morning, the hill was gone, and he went to the king and demanded his prize. The king had to keep his promise, so the young man and the princess left on the golden horse. The fox then suggested that they also take the bird. The young man asked how that could be done, and the fox gave him instructions. Everything went according to plan. They rode off with the bird, but then the fox requested to be killed. The young man refused, but received good advice from the fox, which was to never ransom anyone from the gallows and never sit by the side of a river. Everything went according to plan. The fox said that when they reached the castle where the bird was kept, he would stay with the princess at the door, while the young man would go in and speak to the king. Once the king saw the right horse, he would bring out the bird. The young man would then request to examine the bird to ensure it was the right one, and once he had it in his hands, he could ride away. As the fox predicted, everything went smoothly. They took the bird, the princess got back on the horse, and they traveled to a dense forest. The fox then appeared and asked to be killed, with his head and feet cut off. But the young man refused to do so. The fox then gave him a piece of advice: never ransom anyone from the gallows, and never sit beside any river. Afterward, the fox left. The young man thought that it was easy to keep that advice. With the princess by his side, he continued his journey until they reached the village where he had left his 2 brothers. Upon arrival, they heard a commotion, and upon inquiry, they discovered that 2 men were to be executed for their crimes. As they drew closer, he realized that his brothers were the 2 men who had turned to robbery. He asked if there was any way to save them, but the villagers replied that the only way was to pay the amount demanded by the authorities. Without hesitation, he paid the sum, and his brothers were released, and they traveled with him towards their home. Upon reaching the forest where they had initially encountered the fox, the temperature had dropped significantly and felt rather refreshing. The 2 siblings decided to take a break, sit alongside the river, and consume some food and beverages. Despite being warned by the fox, the younger brother carelessly sat near the riverbank, allowing his guard to drop. As a result, his brothers seized the opportunity to push him off the bank and steal the princess, the horse, and the bird. They then returned to their kingdom and presented their loot to their king, claiming it was the fruit of their efforts. Although there was great joy and celebration after the successful mission, the horse refused to eat, the bird would not sing, and the princess could not stop crying. At the river, the youngest son fell to the bottom. Fortunately, the river was almost dry, but his bones were badly injured, and he couldn't find a way to get out due to the steep bank. The old fox appeared again and scolded him for not taking his advice, then pulled him out of the river by his tail. The fox warned him that his brothers were searching to kill him if they find him within the kingdom. So, the youngest son disguised himself as a poor man and sneaked into the king's court. As soon as he entered the court, the horse began to eat, the bird began to sing, and the princess stopped crying. He went directly to the king and told him about his brother's deceit, and they were punished. After the king's death, the youngest son became the king's heir and got back the princess. Years later, he met the old fox in the woods and begged him to kill him. Eventually, he did it, and the fox transformed into a man who turned out to be the long-lost brother of the princess. Let the enchantment of our tale stay in our hearts as we slowly go asleep. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to show your support for these cozy bedtime stories. Sweet dreams, my darling buddies, till we meet again.